People of colour, or the coloured people, make up a sizable portion of the Cape Town community or the Cape Town dynamic. In tonight's edition of Our City Matters, we ask, what is the state of the coloured community? Once again, a pleasure being in your company this evening for Our City Matters. My name is Tashreeq, Truebody. A very warm welcome to Cape Town TV. In tonight's edition, we take a look at coloured people. You know, what is the state of the coloured community? Is there such a thing as a coloured community, as being coloured? These are the questions we are probing in tonight's edition of Our City Matters. And in order for us to do so, we have Ryan Swano. He is a co-founder of a website called bruin-ou. Ryan, thank you so much for your time.
Hi.
Also with us is Professor Desiree Lewis, who is from the University of the Western Cape, involved with gender studies. Professor, thank you so much for your time. Ryan, let's get into our discussion. You know, first of all, tell me about your website. You know, what exactly is it?
Bruin-ou was started in 2001 by a guy called Charles Ash. I'm not actually a co-founder. I'm now the owner. Technically, I'm the owner now of it. Charles Ash is still involved. Charles Ash grew up in a coloured community of Wentworth in Durban.
Mm-hmm.
He moved to Johannesburg. Basically, apartheid structures were still in place, so you move from a coloured area to another coloured area.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought coloured people only come from the Western Cape.
No, not that. There's coloured people all over the country. And he moved to another coloured area in Johannesburg. Then he moved to Steenberg in Cape Town. And that was in 2001. And then he realized, no matter where in the country it goes, the dynamics of the community is virtually the same. It's there be some nuances and small differences, but basically they were all the same.
But what does that mean? Because you know, when in dealing with this subject, I try to understand what does it mean being coloured. What is being coloured?
Coloured is an artificial social construct created by apartheid. There wasn't God created colours. And said like, okay, what happened was you'd have people of different, I use the term race loosely because that doesn't really exist, but people of different race groups were bundled together and said, okay, you can only procreate with yourself, amongst yourself. And then there was this mixed group. And the apartheid system said these mixed groups are only allowed to procreate amongst themselves.
Yeah.
So they would all be bundled in the area and said, okay, you all the mixed people one side, all the black African people one side, all the whites one side, all the Indians one side. And so you'd have people mixed from different cultures from all over the world. I grew up in Alse River. There was Chinese people living in Alse River. That's another story, but there'd be Malay, there'd be slaves from West Africa and from East Africa. There'd be your Nguni tribes that's married into it. Of course, the biggest component, and this is genetically proven, is still Khoisan.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, whites from all over the world. And then suddenly apartheid said all these mixed people can't go and be part of the culture of one of the cultures they come from. So I couldn't say like, okay, because my dad is Afrikaner and my mom is Khoisan, I'm now going to either be Khoisan or I'm going to be either Afrikaner. I became a
became isolated and had to go live on your own.
And then that forced a sort of a social structure where those people were all bound together and chucked into locations and said, okay, you have to develop something and become your own.
Yeah, Professor Desiree, looking at that, it's a deeply historical matter that we're talking about. You know, it's not just about how we speak or whether or not we have front teeth. There's a large, bigger problem, and often people fall into stereotypes about, you know, what it means and what it is to be coloured. So, in your understanding of this construct, you know, just how deep does it go?
Yeah, I think I would like to start off with where you started off with, which is to stress, of course, that colored is a construct. It's a label that's been imposed on a group of people. But having said that, that label has become real in the sense that people have tended to interact among each other. They forged a sense of community. There are particular socio-historical problems that affect particular groups under certain circumstances. And the reasons for that are complex. They go back to histories of slavery, what you were talking about before, fetal alcohol syndrome, and so on. So I think that for me at the moment, one of the challenges, and we were talking about this before, is to think about how one can combine a discussion that acknowledges that these labels, like all identity labels, even the label black or white, those are artificial labels. People do not simply exist, as you say, as white or black. These are labels that are imposed. So to have that kind of discussion at the same time that we have a really serious discussion of how it is that particular groups are affected in certain ways. So I suppose just the bottom line, that would be the way that I would map things out.
But when one tries to understand this, again, what it means to be colored, because you have, for example, today many groupings about that says, well, you know, we are proudly colored. We are colored, and this is how we are, and this is how we've come. And the fact that we're being sidelined, be it by government policy or otherwise. So there are people of color that's embracing this identity.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about this construct, which you know, we can go into deep sociological discussion about it, but in understanding the embracing of this identity, what do we understand by this?
First of all, for me, I would position myself as someone who cannot embrace an identity in that essentialized way, because simply by doing that you are actually reinforcing the idea that somehow essentially this is who you are. And of course, nobody is in essence. We are all created by all sorts of circumstances.
You're saying, but Butti's smiling at the moment.
Exactly. And I think people need to be reminded about that. But again, having said that, I am very well aware of why it is that people under certain conditions will embrace identities. I grew up as someone who embraced that identity black because it was important. It was politically important to embrace that identity, because as black women, especially as black students, we were defined as inferior. We needed to assert ourselves in all sorts of ways.
And it was Bika that said, you know, using that particular manner in dealing with it is to show that you are proud of where you come from. It's not an inferiority complex.
Exactly.
But I want to come to you, Ryan. You know, in identifying as being colored as such, you know, but what does this mean? I mean, your website is also called bruin-ou. Does this mean that you fall back into that bracket where of people that says, you know, well, you know, we are colored and we are proud?
Our tagline is beyond identity.
Yeah.
As I've spoken to the professor earlier on, I see myself as many things. I'm not just one isolated thing. I've been classified as colored. I didn't choose to be called a colored. If I fill in a form today, I'm still a colored.
As a colored man, can I then ask you, if you go for an application at a job and somebody asks you to tick off whether you're colored, white or black, does that offend you?
No. As I was saying earlier on, I'm many things. I'm black. As I grew up in the 80s with that identity idea of I'm not white, that means I'm black. Because they're saying we must be proud of who we are and where we come from. But I also see myself as Khoi.
Yeah.
I'm an urban Khoi. I don't belong to a specific tribe. It's difficult for me to go claim that I belong to a specific tribe. It's nearly impossible. But therefore there are many people who can and who do. Then I'm also a citizen of the globe.
Yeah.
I'm made up of everything, as I've said earlier on, as people from all over the world contributed to where I am. So yes, I'm being labeled as a colored, but I'm not just a colored.
Yeah.
I'm many things. So that I want to move back beyond the identity of colored and say we have now been classified as such over the years, and now we're sitting we've inherited a certain set of circumstances that's peculiar to our communities. In dealing with that, we can't be bogged down with the idea of, no, I see myself as black and you see yourself as Khoisan and you see we all in the same boat together.
And I want to deal with this quickly. We're going to go for a break soon, but we're talking to Ryan Swano. He's a co-founder of a website called bruin-ou. Ryan, there is a deep-held view that in the coloured community that coloured people still hold, and this may be an after effect of Verwoerdian policies, but coloured people still hold inherent racist views and perceptions of black people.
I would agree with you. I would actually agree with you. It's one of the things that when I started getting heavily involved with bruin-ou.com was to there's a fine line between being proud of who you are and your identity and suppressing somebody else's identity or oppressing somebody else's identity. And the Verwoerdian system set it up so nicely that
I don't even know if I'm racist.
I don't even know that I'm being racist
when
I'm saying certain things or when I'm doing certain things and acting towards people in a certain way. So part of my let's call it job on the website, when it was still very much, it was basically the social network for coloureds, because there was no such thing as Facebook in 2004 and 2003 and whatever. And part of my job as a moderator and administrator was to actually try and show people, listen here, you're
not an island on your own.
You're not an island on your own. That's number one. But also,
before you get to number two, and I'm interested in number two, we have to go for a break soon, but I quickly want to bring you in here, Professor, for the next 30 seconds. Do you find that there are inherent views, held by some nationalistic coloureds, let's call them that, that they are still inherently racist towards black people?
I would agree with you that there are some very strongly racist views, and I think our current context is a time to look very, very critically and carefully at these racist views, because paradoxically in post-apartheid South Africa there's also been a kind of a shift towards thinking about yourself in terms of your culture, your identity. And I think that there's been an upsurge of quite racist thinking among many people who have been classified coloured.
Well, we have a similar problem, with, let's say, certain quarters of the black community in KwaZulu-Natal making anti-Indian statements. So clearly there's a problem that we're dealing with, and it extends beyond just the coloured community. We're talking about the coloured identity in Our City Matters this evening. When we return, are coloured people just, people without front teeth? Are they just drunkards? Are they just tikkoper? These are the questions and the social dynamics that we explore when we return.
What makes a good villain? Or should I say, what makes a villain any good? Is it a certain je ne sais quoi? Oh my. A sense of style? Wow. A way of doing things or getting things done? Is it in your commanding tone? How about your super cool gadgets? Or your super cool hideaway? A femme fatale is pretty much mandatory.
Hi there.
Just like your trusty sidekick, always there to make sure you don't miss a thing. Hi. So go on, let's hear it for the bad guy, just this once. Because let's face it, the good would be rather sad without a little bit of bad.
Very colourful matters under discussion this evening on Our City Matters. We're talking about, the coloured question. Is there such a thing as a coloured community, and what is the state of the coloured community? As we indicated before the break, what are coloured people? What are they known for? Let's deal with some of those stereotypes. And I want to go to you, Ryan. These stereotypes that we're sitting with, and look, it may well be downright prejudicial, but the reality is, if you look at the coloured community, affected by gangsterism and drugs, affected by fetal alcohol syndrome, it seems that they are almost trapped in a social system that's not working for them.
If you look at fetal alcohol syndrome and you look at gangsterism, these are all things that, if you go deep into it, you'll figure that these were apartheid ploys. Fetal alcohol syndrome doesn't just stem from
An auntie that wants to drink a lot.
I smaak to drink and whatever. It's been sort of put in place by the DOP system. If you look at gangsterism, it's been proven people like Dr. Death, can't get to his name now.
Wouter Basson.
Wouter Basson. He was bringing huge, massive amounts of drugs into our communities. And then obviously people were supposed to control that drug shipments. So who was going to do it? The gangsters. We're also sitting with, and unfortunately all of those things has led to we sitting with proportionately the highest amount of incarceration for our population group. And that's how I like to describe coloredness, by the way. It's a population group, artificially created. But for our population group, we're sitting with the highest amount of incarcerations. That is not an accident. That is not a choice that we made. There is a system behind it, and that is what needs to be broken down. But also, that we can't wait for the government to break it down. The government is not going to bother with the nuances of breaking it down. Yes, they claim to want to be involved, and whatever other parties also step up to the plate. But we as communities, we've got to start in our own homes.
Yeah.
We've got to start with our own kids.
It reminds me of Bob Marley saying, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, because, none but ourselves can in fact free our minds. So, Professor, on that note, I mean, you go to a university described, as a university van die brein mense, university of the left, etc. How does the colored community begin to deal with, these Verwoerdian legacies?
It's interesting that you brought up Bob Marley, because, I think one of the things that we underestimate is just the power of stereotypes, of representations, of the images of particular communities, especially in South Africa. And of course the stereotypes about coloredness are all about shame, inferiority, and of course impurity, the idea of not being pure. And I think that is often so deeply internalized, this sort of sense of being caught in between. I don't know how often particular people who are categorized colored talk about being caught in between. And that's in many ways very much the legacy of a particular way of being positioned historically and politically through the colored labor preference policy in the Western Cape. So for me it's very encouraging that many students, for example, in national movements like the Fees Must Fall movement right now are actually thinking, this is ridiculous. I have so much in common with other students, black and white. So I think that there's hope, there's scope to break out of this, but I think we still need to spend a lot of time thinking about what are these stereotypes, how have they been used, and how are we actually somehow internalizing them, reproducing them, even though we think we're being assertive.
Yeah, but I want to stay with you, looking at, yes, it may well be stereotypes, but if one looks at the reality about, we discussed the dope system, fetal alcohol syndrome. I mean, it's a shame that you see the amount of drugs and gangsterism taking place, and these are small little groupings keeping the entire community to ransom. But this is the reality. This is what, unfortunately, one can identify with the colored community.
No, as I said, I think you've been saying this very clearly, that there are very particular social issues that affect particular communities, and there are histories to this. You've described it very clearly, that there's the dope system that work to, shape forms of dependency and subservience and have affected generations of young children. So these are the social realities that have political and historical origins. And it's so important to accept that these are the realities.
So that's where we come from, Professor Desiree Lewis there from the UWC Gender Studies. I want to come back to you, Ryan. If that was where we came from, what is the current dispensation doing? I mean, I know there's a big outcry over employment equity and so on, but let's leave employment equity for now. Let's look at development in these so-called colored areas. Why does Hanover Park and Bonteheuwel still look the way it does?
I will tell you now, it actually baffles me that we're still sitting, albeit that it's only 20-something years later, but we're sitting in and we're still looking with the same type, we're still having the same type of social little borders, societal borders. We still have certain budgets being allocated in certain ways to certain areas. If you look at Bonteheuwel, for instance, so the city came in and just basically they imposed a development on the community without involving the community. It had good intentions. Good intentions, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Nowadays they call it unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's so what we need from government, and this is from all tiers of government, from city right through to national government, right through to the presidency, is do not claim to do things for communities, in communities, and these communities don't even know what you're doing. You build a resource center, and people living 5 blocks away from a resource center doesn't even know that it is a resource center. Then there's also, and I'm talking about the present now, I don't want to dwell in the past, but just taking the resources from the past and fancying it up does not bring about equality in access to resources. For instance, sending my child to a Model C school 15 kilometers away, where he has to get up 6 o'clock in the morning, leave the house 6 o'clock in the morning, still does not bring equality in education, because he gets home, he leaves home when it's dark, he gets home when it's almost dark. The child that lives in that area where that quality education, higher quality, let's call it that, education is available, that child has a whole day to do his homework. My child gets home, he's got to be worried, can my daddy afford electricity? Where am I going to do my research, because the library is not around the corner, and it's closed already when I get home from school. So all these types of things, people say yes, those things are being made available. How is it being made available? And when I'm talking about those resources, I'm not just talking about Bonteheuwel and Delft or whatever. I'm talking about Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, all those places. Anyway, if you talk about semi-rural areas, like on in the Boerland, whatever, is how does a child get access to quality education? It is available, yes, but it's not available there where he is. It's not brought to him.
Yeah, but then, you know, this thing baffles me. I mean, before we could argue that this may, the driving force may have been racism or different colors, you know. If one takes a look at the current dispensation, and I want to bring it down to home, right? You have a colored mayor, and I'm trying to use the stereotypes for obvious reasons now to make my point. You have a colored mayor, you have a provincial MEC for human settlements called Bonkinkosi Madikizela. So if it is that you have a situation where you have grave challenges in Khayelitsha, where people are expected to go and relieve themselves in an undignified toilet, and people are still struggling to get a proper soccer field, why don't we not see an acceleration of these basic services within our communities?
Sorry, is your point that, considering that we have in certain situations coloured leaders, why are they not doing something for their people?
Yes.
Well, I suppose for me that raises the importance of thinking also about class, and I think you made this point that we all have many identities, you know. So racialized identity is not the only identity you have. You also have a class identity which comes with a particular kind of behavior. So someone who is a colored mayor will also behave in class terms to pursue usually his, by the way, his interests. And just ignore the needs of the poor community. And I think that's also something that sometimes as South Africans, because I mean we've been so taught to think about identities primarily in terms of race, that especially in this post-apartheid context where class is so important, and we have, you know, black, very strong, powerful middle-class people. Sorry, I'm going on.
No. It's an important point that I want you to continue on, the issue of class, because when we begin to look at this, I mean, we can go national, and I know we are diverting a bit here from, but it's in relation to our discussion about the coloured community. If one takes a look at what happened in 2012 in Marikana, you have, of course, our current deputy president, then Lonman director, sitting on a board, etc. He came from the union circles. I mean, it does show and does portray it to be a serious divide between different classes. Isn't it, Professor?
I agree totally. And I think that, I mean, for me that is, and I'm assuming that that's also one of the issues that you are raising in your website. And I hope also gender, by the way. I'm a bit concerned about bruin-ou. I have to admit.
She's saying you need a coloured Macy as well.
As bruin-ou is the Durban term. Charles Ashbring from Durban is a Durban term for coloured.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not gender specific.
Okay, I see.
About the issue of class. I ran a story a couple of years ago, and I actually think I should actually run it again. As I call, kom wys ons hoe. As speaking to the people that grow up in areas like Els River, Pontyville, which is plain whatever, moving to areas like Plattekloof and Camps Bay and whatever, and they've worked hard to attain those positions. No doubt, they didn't. No nie, sommer net so per ongeluk en by geluk gekry nie. But they've worked hard to get there. I see it as their job to mentor and show others. Don't just bring the kids to come show this is where I grow up, or this is where I grew up and this is where Granny lives still. Or you don't even bring the kids to come spend a day at Granny. You can fetch Granny to come spend a day by your house in Plattekloof. So your community sees you driving that flashy car. They don't know what you are. You could be the counter to that example, that bad example that he sees of the guy that didn't work hard for his that's using other people to get his flashy car. That stays in the community and he contributes to the community because he's buying people food and everything and paying people's lights and rents and whatever. You've got the education or the position or both. You now live in a different area. You're not actually showing these kids that there's an alternative. So we want you to come back. Kom terug en wys ons so. Don't tell me, yes, you can also live up on this hill.
Yeah.
Come down and show me how to climb this hill. Because that guy that's living in my area, that's got the double-story house and drives 3 different fancy cars, these kids are seeing him as a role model. And he's the wrong role model.
And sometimes, unfortunately, the reality is nowadays the guy that owns the double-story house with the 3 flashy cars turns out to be the drug dealer.
I'm talking about him. So basically, the guy that's doing legitimate things to become financially successful and to secure a future for his kids should come back and show others how to do it. Kom af van die bultjie af, come down from the hill, come show us all how to climb that hill.
Yeah.
Help us build more staircases up that hill, more steps up that hill. Because showing me also, somebody showing me this is how you climb up and that's the route, that also is not enough. Help me build a staircase up the hill so that many can follow. Yeah. Basically, we don't even need to go live up the hill. We just need to know how to climb the hill. We can then, at the end of the day, all the lovely things in the hill can become the lovely things in our own community.
Professor, I'm guessing that's why so many students of late that were born in 1992 is today able to sing a struggle song in honor of Chris Hani. That, an example was set, and so surely the struggle must continue. What would you suggest is the way forward in dealing with the coloured question?
Ooh, so many things. It's a huge question. But I think that there are moments that create opportunities for people to realize that actually they share a lot in common when they are united in terms of political ideals. And one of the ideals that I think you mentioned is that there is something beyond identity. There's a sense of being human, there's a sense of freedom, which has to do with respect for others, not thinking about. So I have hope. It might be very naive that many young people are still thinking in that way.
Well, I guess the term to end off with is Asijiki. Indeed, we will continue hawking on. Well, that's our discussion this evening on the coloured question, the colourful discussion that we had. I trust that you found it interesting. It's one that I think we should certainly pick up on once again on this program, but indeed being a pleasure in your company. Whatever you do, I think I'd like to end off with that quote again of Bob Marley, that, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, because, it's only you that can do it. None but ourselves can free our minds, and it's a mindset. If you still think of your way in a very narrowed, prescribed view on dealing with the issue of the coloured identity. Well, that is where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you so much to my guest. In studio we had Ryan Swano. He is from an organization, a website called bruin-ou, as well as Professor Desiree Lewis. She is at the University of the Western Cape in the Gender Studies Department. From myself, Tashreeq, Truebody, and the rest of the team, you have a good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.